Somewhere out past the last fence line, past the last sealed road, past the point where your phone gives up and your fuel gauge starts making you nervous, the Australian Outback is holding onto things it has never explained. Carved faces staring out of sandstone in a desert where no faces should be. Stone quarries the size of small towns that nobody noticed until a few years ago. Engravings so old that the scientists who tried to date them ended up arguing with each other for decades instead. And a figure scraped into the desert floor so enormous you can only see it from the sky, made by someone who has never come forward. These are 12 ancient structures scattered across the Australian Outback, and the one thing they all have in common is that nobody can put a firm date on any of them. Some of them might be among the oldest human works on the planet. Some of them might be younger than you are, and that uncertainty is not a small technical footnote. It sits at the centre of the biggest open question in Australian history, because a continent occupied for over 60,000 years should be covered in datable monuments, and instead the Outback hands us masterpieces with the labels torn off. Before we head out onto the dirt roads, do us a favour and hit subscribe. Loving Wallaby brings you the strange, remote, and forgotten corners of Australia every week, and it genuinely helps the channel grow. Now grab your water, check your spare tyre, and let's get into it. Number 12. The Cleland Hills, Faces. Deep in the western desert of the Northern Territory, about 300 kilometres west of Alice Springs, a low range called the Cleland Hills rises out of the red sand. In 1967, an archaeologist named Michael Terry documented something out there that still unsettles researchers today. Carved into the rock near a waterhole known as Thomas Reservoir are human faces, not stick figures, not symbols, actual faces with eyes and expressions pecked into the stone alongside hundreds of other engravings. Heart-shaped faces staring out of the desert. The problem is that engraved rock cannot be radiocarbon dated because there is nothing organic to test. Researchers can only study the desert varnish that slowly forms over the carvings, and varnish accumulation is notoriously unreliable as a clock. Estimates for the faces have ranged from a few thousand years to well over 10,000. The traditional owners hold their own knowledge about the site, but for Western science, the faces of the Cleland Hills remain officially undated, staring at every visitor who makes the long drive out, giving nothing away. What makes the faces even stranger is how rare they are. Engraved human faces are almost unknown in Australian rock art. Across a continent covered in tracks, circles, and figures, the artists of the Western Desert almost never carved a face. Except here, at one waterhole, in one range, somebody broke the rule, and we have no idea when, or why, or whether the faces were meant to welcome travellers to the water or warn them away from it. Number 11. The Ewaninga clay pan engravings. Just south of Alice Springs, an ancient clay pan sits surrounded by low sandstone outcrops, and those outcrops are covered in petroglyphs. Circles, animal tracks, waving lines, and geometric patterns hammered into the rock by artists whose names are long gone. The Archaeological custodians say the meanings of these particular carvings are so sacred they cannot be revealed to the uninitiated at all. But here is the part that gets researchers leaning forward. The engravings are cut in a style that appears across thousands of kilometres of the continent, and many of the Ewaninga carvings are heavily weathered, worn down, in a way that suggests enormous age. Some geologists have pointed out that certain motifs sit on rock surfaces that have been eroding for tens of thousands of years. Yet nobody can prove when a hammer first struck that stone. It could be 4,000 years. It could be 30,000. The clay pan floods after rain. The carvings watch the water come and go, and the date stays out of reach. Stand there at sunset, when the low light rakes across the outcrops and every groove fills with shadow, and you can feel the problem in your bones. These are clearly not recent. The rock tells you that much. But the gap between clearly old and provably old is where entire scientific careers have gone to die, and Ewaninga sits squarely inside that gap. Visitors today walk a short loop track past the outcrops, most of them never realizing they may be looking at some of the oldest surviving human messages on the continent, written in a script that was never meant for them to read. Number 10. Darla Gorge. Head east from Alice Springs into the East McDonnell Ranges, and you reach a narrow gorge holding one of the densest collections of rock engravings in Central Australia. Nearly 6,000 individual petroglyphs are packed into Darla Gorge, pecked and pounded into the rock walls. Some depict ceremonial figures with elaborate headdresses. Archaeologists believe the engravings span two completely different eras, with some produced in recent centuries and others belonging to a far older tradition, possibly stretching back 10,000 years. But that split is an educated guess, built on style and weathering, not hard measurement. Two artists could have worked side by side thousands of years apart, on the same wall, and modern science cannot always tell their work apart. 6,000 carvings, and not a single confirmed date among them. The gorge itself adds another layer to the puzzle. Flash floods tear through Nadala after desert storms, scouring the walls and rearranging the floor, which means any datable material that ever sat beneath the engravings was washed toward the plains long ago. The artist chose a gallery that nature rinses clean on a regular schedule. Whether that was deliberate, we will never know, but it certainly worked. And yet people kept coming back, century after century, adding new figures beside the old ones, which tells us the gorge mattered enough to be worth the climb, the heat, and the floods for longer than anyone can measure. Number 9. Puritjarra Rock Shelter, west of the Cleland Hills. A huge sandstone overhang called Puritjarra Shelters, a slice of human history that quietly rewrote the textbooks. When archaeologist Mike Smith excavated the shelter floor in the 1980s, he found stone tools and ochre going down layer after layer, with the deepest occupation levels dating to more than 35,000 years ago. That proved people were living in the driest heart of the continent during the Ice Age, when most experts had insisted the desert was empty. But here is the twist. The dates come from charcoal in the dirt, not from the structure itself, and the shelter walls carry painted hand stencils and engraved grooves that cannot be tied to any particular layer. The art on the walls of Puritjarra floats free of the timeline beneath it. Ochre crayons worn down from use were found deep in those ancient layers, which proves the first occupants were making art with pigment during the Ice Age. What they painted, and whether any trace of it survives on the walls above, is a connection nobody has been able to lock in. People were there 35 millennia ago. Whether the oldest marks on the wall belong to those first arrivals or to visitors 20,000 years later is a question nobody has been able to close. Number 8. Sturts Meadows. On a lonely sheep station north of Broken Hill in far western New South Wales, low ridges of dark rock run through the saltbush, and those ridges carry one of the largest galleries of ancient engravings on Earth. Sturts Meadows holds tens of thousands of individual motifs, by some counts the biggest concentration of its kind anywhere. Kangaroo tracks, emu tracks, circles, crescents, and human footprints, all hammered through the dark surface crust into the paler stone beneath. Researchers who studied the site noted that many engravings are completely revarnished, meaning the desert has had time to grow a whole new mineral skin over the carvings, a process that takes thousands upon thousands of years. Some estimates push parts of the gallery beyond 10,000 years old. Others argue the varnish clock is broken and always has been, so the largest rock engraving site in the region, and possibly the world, sits in a paddock without a birthday. The station owners have quietly protected the ridges for generations, and researchers who visit describe the same feeling. You walk along the outcrop, and the engravings just keep going, over the next rise, and the next, thousands of motifs pecked one hammer blow at a time, representing a quantity of human labor that is genuinely hard to comprehend. Someone, or more likely many generations of someones, spent lifetimes on this ridge. The stone remembers the work, it just refuses to remember the date. Number 7. Mutawintji. In the Bingwano Ranges northeast of Broken Hill, red gorges hide rock shelters filled with hand stencils, paintings, and engravings, thousands of years of artistic tradition layered on top of itself. Mutawintji was so significant that ceremonies drew people from hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The engravings on the open rock platforms are the mystery here. Unlike the painted shelters, where pigment can occasionally trap datable material, the pecked platforms give scientists nothing to work with. Motifs at Mutawintji resemble engraving styles found right across arid Australia, part of an artistic tradition so widespread and seemingly so ancient that some researchers have called it the oldest continuous art style on the planet. When did it begin here, in these specific gorges? Nobody knows. The traditional owners closed parts of the site to visitors decades ago, and the stone keeps its schedule to itself. What we do know is that the water made this place. Permanent rock holes in the gorges meant Mutawintji never fully dried, even in the worst droughts. So, if any place in the Western Ranges was going to accumulate tens of thousands of years of continuous human presence, it was here. The art density supports exactly that. The chronology to prove it does not exist. Number 6. The Fireplaces of Lake Mungo. The Willandra Lakes region of far southwest New South Wales is famous for the ancient burials found in its crescent-shaped dunes, but scattered across the dry lake floors is something less famous and just as strange: ancient fireplaces. Hearths of baked clay and stone, hundreds of them, eroding out of the sediment where people cooked fish and mussels on the shore of a lake that dried up more than 14,000 years ago. Some hearths have been dated to around 30,000 years. Others have produced readings that scattered wildly because wind and water constantly shuffle the sediments, moving old material onto young surfaces and young material into old layers. Every dust storm exposes new hearths and destroys others. Scientists are literally racing the wind, trying to date structures that are vanishing faster than they can be studied. For every fireplace with a number attached, dozens more crumble away undated. And these are not casual campfires. Some of the Mungo hearths are built structures, clay ovens, shaped and reused, positioned in clusters that suggest organized seasonal gatherings along the ancient shoreline. People stood at these exact spots, grilling golden perch while glaciers covered half of Europe. That is not speculation. That part, at least, the dates confirm. Number 5. The Panaramitee engravings. Scattered across the ranges of northeast and South Australia is the artistic tradition that gave its name to the deepest mystery in Australian rock art: the Panaramitee style. Circles, animal tracks, and dots pecked into stone in a visual language so consistent that near-identical panels appear thousands of kilometres apart, from the Olari district to the Kimberley to Tasmania. Think about what that means. Tasmania has been cut off from the mainland by rising seas for more than 10,000 years. If the same engraving tradition exists on both sides of Bass Strait, the tradition is probably older than the strait itself. That indirect logic is the strongest dating evidence anyone has, and it is still just logic. The type site itself, out on Panaramitee Station, has never yielded a direct, undisputed age, an art movement possibly older than the pyramids by 10,000 years, and its birth certificate is a shrug. Here is the detail that keeps researchers up at night. If the Panaramitee tradition really does predate the flooding of Bass Strait, then the style was already ancient, standardized, and spread across the entire continent before the end of the last ice age, which would make it not just Australia's oldest art movement, but arguably the longest-running artistic tradition in the history of our species. If you are enjoying this trip through Australia's deepest question marks, tap that like button. It tells us you want more Outback mysteries, and it helps other curious travellers find the channel. Number 4. The Karolta controversy. Near Yunta in South Australia, an unassuming spread of engraved boulders became the battlefield for one of the nastiest scientific arguments in Australian archaeology. In the late 1980s, a researcher used a technique called cation ratio dating on the desert varnish covering the Karolta engravings and announced ages of more than 30,000 years, which at the time would have made them the oldest dated rock art on Earth. Headlines followed. Then the fight started. Other scientists attacked the method, arguing the chemistry of desert varnish is too messy and too local to work as a clock. The original results were challenged, defended, retested, and eventually the whole technique fell out of favour worldwide. The engravings themselves never changed. They sit there today exactly as they did before the argument, possibly the oldest art on the planet, possibly not, with a dating file that reads like a courtroom transcript and ends without a verdict. The saddest part is what the fight cost. Funding dried up, careers were bruised, and for years, researchers quietly avoided the whole question of directly dating Australian engravings because Karolta had made it radioactive. One argument over one method at one site slowed the science for a generation, while the boulders waited in the saltbush, as patient as only stone can be. Newer laboratory methods are slowly circling back to sites like this one, and one day the question may finally be settled. Until then, Karolta remains the site that was, for one brief moment, officially the oldest art on Earth. Number 3. Koonalda Cave. Beneath the Nullarbor Plain, where the flattest landscape on Earth stretches to every horizon, a sinkhole drops into darkness. Koonalda Cave descends far below the surface, and deep inside, in total blackness, ancient people did something extraordinary. They dug flint from the cave walls, and they dragged their fingers through the soft limestone surface, leaving flowing patterns called finger flutings across the walls and ceiling. Thousands of lines, made in a place where no daylight has ever reached by people carrying fire underground. Charcoal from the mining floors has been dated to around 20,000 years and more, proving people were down there during the Ice Age. But the flutings themselves cannot be dated. Were they made by the flint miners, or by others who came 1,000 years earlier, or 5,000 years later? All science can say is that at some point, in the dark, under the desert, human hands moved across that stone with purpose. When and why, the cave will not say. There is one more detail worth sitting with. The flutings run across the ceiling in places, and sections of that ceiling have since collapsed, with fluted slabs lying broken on the cave floor. The art was made before the collapse. Date the collapse, and you get a minimum age. But cave collapses are almost as hard to date as the art itself, so even the cave falling apart has managed to keep the secret intact. Number 2. The Mithaka quarries of the Channel Country. In the far southwest of Queensland, in the flood country of the Diamantina, researchers working with the Mithaka people made an announcement in recent years that stunned the archaeological world. Scattered across the landscape are ancient quarries, not a few pits, not dozens. Surveys have mapped many hundreds of quarry sites, with some counts running into the thousands, where grindstone material was cut from the rock on a scale that looks less like foraging and more like industry. Alongside the quarries are traces of stone dwellings and the remains of what early explorers described as villages. It suggests a level of settlement and organised production in the outback that history books said never existed. And the dating? Barely begun. The quarries were only properly documented within the last decade. The region is vast, and the pits themselves are just holes in rock, immune to radiocarbon, and the traditional owners are directing the research on their own terms, at their own pace. One of the largest ancient production landscapes in Australia is sitting in plain sight, and science has only just started asking how old it is. Early radiocarbon work on associated material has hinted at activity stretching back at least 2,000 years, but the deeper story is wide open. The explorers who crossed this country in the 1800s wrote about well-worn paths, large camps, and organised harvesting of native grain across the floodplains. Those accounts were filed away and largely forgotten, and the quarries stayed invisible to science for another century and a half. The Channel Country may end up rewriting what we think we know about how people lived in the driest parts of this continent, and the dating work that will decide it has only just left the starting line. Number 1. The Marree Man. And now, for the mystery that proves the outback can still hide its secrets in the modern age. In June 1998, a charter pilot flying over the desert near the tiny town of Marree in South Australia looked down and saw something impossible. Carved into the plateau below was the figure of a hunter, 4 kilometers tall, holding a throwing stick. The lines were up to 30 meters wide and had been bulldozed into the earth with surveying precision. It is one of the largest geoglyphs on the planet, and nobody made it. At least, nobody who has ever admitted it. No witnesses saw machinery. No tracks led in or out that could be traced to an owner. Anonymous faxes hinted at American involvement. Locals suspected an eccentric artist from Alice Springs, who died without confirming a thing. Here is why he belongs on this list. We know the Marree Man appeared in 1998, but we cannot date its creation to a builder, a crew, a machine, or a motive. If a 4-kilometer figure can be carved into the Australian desert within living memory and remain unexplained, imagine how easily the outback swallowed the stories of works made 10,000 years ago. There is one last twist to the Marree Man. The desert began erasing him almost immediately. Within 2 decades, the lines had faded so badly he was nearly invisible, until locals dragged graders out in 2016 and recut the figure to save it, which means the biggest modern geoglyph in the country has already needed restoration within a single human generation. Now apply that maths to the ancient sites on this list. Everything we can still see out there has survived hundreds or thousands of generations of the same erasure, which tells you 2 things. The old works were built to last, and for every structure we can still find, the desert has almost certainly taken 100 more. So there they are, 12 structures scattered across the red heart of a continent. Some possibly among the oldest marks humans ever made, one made within living memory, and every single one of them slipping through the fingers of every dating method science can throw at them. The Outback is not empty. It never was. It is an archive with no index, a library where the books have no publication dates. And every year, the wind, the floods, and the varnish quietly edit the collection. Maybe that is the real lesson of these 12 sites. We keep asking the Outback how old its structures are, and the Outback keeps answering with a different question entirely. Not when were they made, but how much have you already lost without ever knowing it was there? If this gave you a new reason to look twice at the desert, subscribe to Loving Wallaby and turn on notifications, because next week we are heading somewhere even stranger. Drop a comment and tell us which of these 12 you would drive out to see first. And if you have ever stumbled on something in the Outback that made no sense, we want to hear about it too. Thanks for watching. We will see you on the next dusty road. Somewhere out there, another great undated wonder is waiting under the varnish, and sooner or later, Loving Wallaby is going to find it. Bye for now, legends. Safe travels.